Thanks very much. Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. I should begin by saying that my remarks are based on research carried out by RAND and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. Our work began in December 2001 when the 9/11 response operations were still ongoing and continued over the next 4 years. Many members of the responder community assisted us and contributed to our research. My testimony therefore draws both on my work and that of my co-authors, as well as the contributions of our study's participants, but of course my specific remarks are my responsibility alone. The main message I want to convey is twofold. First, to protect emergency workers at any multi-agency disaster response, there must be an incident safety management structure that can make difficult safety decisions and has the authority needed to implement and enforce them. The only way this can work is if the needed framework has been put in place beforehand in planning and preparedness efforts. The simple answer to why response workers were not sufficiently protected at the World Trade Center is that the preparedness efforts that were in place to do so were simply not designed for an incident of that magnitude. Second, although the experience of the 9/11 responses taught us a great deal about what needs to be done to protect workers at future incidents, many of those lessons are not yet reflected in current practice. Some steps have been taken, and a number of federal preparedness documents, including the Worker Safety Annex that was just mentioned, now do contain a much better blueprint for responder safety management. But to actually protect responders at future disasters, we can't just describe what the system should look like. We actually need to build it and make sure it'll work. I'll now talk a bit more detail about the question posed by the title of the hearing, and then discuss some of the steps that need to be taken to prepare for future incidents. Workers at the World Trade Center were not appropriately protected for a number of reasons. The problems with providing protective equipment to responders at the site are well known. Much of the equipment that they had wasn't suited to the complexity of that hazard environment, and since responders perceived it as hindering their ability to act, it was often not used. Logistics operations were also chaotic, and there were major problems in providing workers essential supplies like cartridges for their respirators. But in spite of the seriousness of the equipment problems, responders told us that the breakdowns in other key safety functions, hazard assessment, making safety decisions, and implementing and enforcing them, which we've collectively called safety management, were at least as detrimental to worker safety. The lack of a single integrated safety management structure to effectively coordinate the many separate response organizations at the site was the main problem. For example, there were multiple organizations that were involved in environmental monitoring, and many response organizations had to rely on those technical agencies for their hazard assessments. But since there wasn't a coordinating structure for that effort, different agencies reported somewhat different results, which produced confusion. Responders spoke of waves of concern going through the site about different hazards as the assessments changed over time. The lack of an integrated safety management structure also meant that some of the most difficult safety decisions did not or could not get made. All response operations are driven initially by the goal of saving lives, as was mentioned in some of the opening remarks, which does involve responders taking risks. But at some point, rescue must transition to recovery when it becomes less likely that lives can be saved. The responders that talked to us told us that transition came too late at the World Trade Center, if it ever came at all. Finally, responders told us that the lack of a clear and integrated command authority significantly hindered the enforcement of safety measures, because different organizations made their own decisions about what their members should do. When it comes to what we can do to help prevent these safety problems at future disasters, the fundamental message is that we must successfully adopt an integrated multi-agency approach to safety that was missing at the World Trade Center response. Elements of what's required to do so are included in documents prepared since 9/11, like the National Response Plan. But to really implement those plans, we need to do more. I'll briefly discuss 3 of the recommendations that came out of our work that are necessary to make this a reality. First, there's a need to really pilot test doing safety management at the state and local level. Although the federal government can lay the groundwork for this, the fact that all response operations do start locally, even large disasters, means that state and local responders must act first when the incident occurs. As a result, figuring out the details, how to do this right, needs to be done at the state and local level. Second, there's a need to conduct preparedness exercises that realistically address responder safety management. Because the focus of most exercises are on the operational parts of response, safety is frequently ignored or given very cursory attention. Finally, we recommend identifying and training disaster safety managers to fill the key safety management roles at major incidents. Playing this role successfully requires knowledge and expertise that most members of the response community are unlikely to get incidentally in their day-to-day activities. This suggests the need for specialized training and preparation and a federal role in supporting their implementation. When our studies were released, their recommendations were broadly supported by key federal safety organizations as well as by lawmakers on both sides of the aisle and representatives of the responder community. In spite of that support, many of the priorities they identified haven't been acted upon. Safety problems at more recent disasters like Hurricane Katrina demonstrate that the system that the country needs is not yet in place. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to address the committee on this topic and look forward to the questions.